So let me go ahead and introduce you to our guest today, Mr. S. Sivakumar. He heads the Agri and IT business for ITC Limited, a multi-business conglomerate which has the largest corporate presence in agriculture in India. ITC's revolutionary e-Chopal initiative was developed and executed under his leadership. Sivakumar serves on the Advisory Council on the National Rural Livelihoods Mission of Ministry of Rural Development, the Commodity Derivatives Advisory Committee of SEBI, and on the Management Committee of National Agricultural Higher Education Project of the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. His blogs and articles are very well followed and appreciated. So we are happy to have Mr. Sivakumar today here. We also have Dr. Rakesh Singh, Chairman of Institute of Supply Chain Management. He's an expertise in the domain of supply chain logistics, demand planning, and IBP. He has worked and is passionate about supply chain, rural supply chains. So let me invite on stage Mr. Sivakumar and Dr. Rakesh Singh to explore the theme of today, managing the agri supply chain. Welcome. Just to inform that we have some technical error and Mr. Sivakumar would not be able to switch on his camera, so we could hear him. And I would request Dr. Rakesh Singh to take the conversations ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaisal, and welcome Sivakumar on the third episode of Supply Chain Prism, the Perspective Show. This particular show is a fireside chat between me and a guest. Today's guest is S. Sivakumar, the head of agribusiness from ITC and a very well-known name, and architect of ITC e-Chopal, which has got many prizes, including the World Forum prizes, Gateway prizes, and so many other prizes for transforming the Indian agricultural markets and in a more developmental and sustainable way. Sivakumar, before we begin with the topic of supply chain, which has become a very hot topic everywhere else, but in agriculture, it has always been a matter of concern, and it has actually been given a new lease of life by the two farm bills, which are utmost controversial today. I thought I will start with asking you the first, a very broader question on agrarian economy, as there are a lot of people who have interest in supply chain are not so aware of agriculture, though we are an agrarian economy. So I'll start with a very simple question to understand these things. And the question is, what role can agriculture play in India in terms of growth, employment, and trade? Because we have seen the share of agriculture has been, coming down, and though it employs a highest number of people, the share has been falling down, meaning that conditions of agrarian or agriculturists have been deteriorating day by day. So what are your views? How do we really make agriculture more growth, employment, and trade oriented?
Thanks, Rakesh. Pleasure being here. Good afternoon. Yes, Rakesh, absolutely. Half of all the workforce in India is currently engaged in agriculture, but contributing just about 1/7 of the GDP of India. So obviously that's a very skewed situation, not only in terms of workforce or number of people, but even when you look at other resources. 90% of all our fresh water is being used in agriculture. Half of all our land is also being used in agriculture. And in terms of share of exports, it's just about 1/7 again. So given our population size, exports of course is not a goal, but to raise farm prices and raise incomes of the people, the farmers on a per capita basis, we need to look at exports, because that is how you can expand the total market that is available. So to be able to export, to be able to raise incomes of the large number of people who are employed in this sector, as well as contribute to better growth of the overall economy, it's important that we raise the total factor productivity in agriculture. So whether it is the productivity per unit of land or water, or the extent of knowledge that we bring into agriculture and along the whole supply chain everywhere, I think the total factor productivity needs to go up. And that's when we are able to really bring higher incomes to so many people who are involved in agriculture. It's therefore a very, very important sector that must come on stream and scale whatever aspirations we have as a country. If we are aspiring for a 5 trillion economy, this is not the shape in which agri can be part of that aspirational economy that we have. Yeah, Rakesh.
Dr. Singh, kindly unmute.
Thank you, Siu, for this such a brief but very apt introduction of Indian agriculture. And as you rightly said, if we need to be a 5 trillion economy, one of the major constraints that we really need to improve in agriculture is supply chain constraints. And Indian agriculture has been, marred by too many regulations like the Essential Commodities Act, even marginal support prices, as they do not allow farmers to diversify, and their dependence becomes so high that they start protesting with any intended change. Interstate movement of goods and food laws, all of them have been, creating a very closed and overtly state-dominated agriculture. What do you think has been the impact of these laws on supply chains and hence on productivity?
Yeah, I think more than just an estimated kind of loss that may be there because of supply chain, I think, to my mind, supply chain innovation is at the very core of transforming Indian agriculture, and how we could be part of that $5 trillion aspirational kind of an economy is essentially going to be led by supply chain transformation. Now, over the past 60 years, Indian agriculture has been a production-driven supply chain system. And that made sense as we were a shortages economy. Because we were essentially living from ship to mouth, it was just enough to produce more and carry all the production efficiently to consumers around the country. But since then, as we attained a level of self-sufficiency in food, barring of course some issues on affordability on part of segment of consumers, the consumer needs by and large have changed over this period. We need to now have a more demand responsive production system on a more dynamic basis. While we were demand responsive 60 years ago, it was at a very, very macro level that we had shortages and therefore we just produce more. But today's demands, be it in terms of quality or food safety or convenience of the consumer, and which segment of consumers in which part of the country have different needs, and the variety of crops that we need to produce and convert into food and supply. So the production system needs to be far more dynamically responsive to demand, and that is one fundamental change. And the second bit is that the supply chain also need to preserve product integrity and full traceability, besides the efficiency that was already existing to a degree, certainly as an objective. So I think that transformation to happen in the whole supply chain, and therefore supply chain is at the very core of where we can take Indian agriculture to.
That's a very well put up thing. But if you look at supply chains and productivity as a framework to develop Indian agriculture, what are the prerequisites before the supply chains can be actually streamlined? There has been a lot of debate in the last 3-4 days about MSP being stored, not being stored. And if you see the research on crop diversification, you've seen that that has really led to a very wrong, segmentation of production processes. People have been producing wheat and rice, overtly producing, and FCI actually stocking more than what it can chew. Secondly, if you look at the speed and velocity that supply chain essentially needs in Indian agriculture. We do not have the sufficient physical infrastructure or supportive warehousing or cold storage infrastructure. So what are your views on that? And how important is these two in terms of making supply chain work?
Yeah, basically, whatever institutions and market mechanisms and supply chain that we have created in the regulatory framework all supported the earlier dispensation of just producing more of cereals and reaching it to the consumers. And that is how we had, whether it was our APMC Act, which essentially was created at a time when farmers were getting exploited in the local traders and money lenders web, and created an open price discovery system, and an Essential Commodities Act, which was created in a situation where we had shortages and hoarding led to black marketing and higher prices. So as this situation changed and we are looking for more productivity and a demand responsive production system, these regulatory framework and the corresponding action by various stakeholders need to also change. And that is the context of all these discussions that have happened now, and whether reforms are appropriate and what needs to change within that. Because in the APMC system, the relationship between a farmer and rest of the value chain participants have been one of a very transactional oriented nature. Because whoever wins the best bid for a heap of produce will take it and move it along the chain. And therefore, there was no linkage between the farmer and the various value chain participants. And obviously, we need to combine resources because our farmers are small, who only have so much of resource. The demand signals are at the other end of the chain, and the various companies and value chain participants in between were also of disconnected and small in nature because of these restrictions of Essential Commodities Act. And therefore, the new regulatory framework had to open it up and make the whole engagement between farmer and rest of the participants as a long-term oriented, so that all the resources and forces can be combined, whether you transmit these demand signals to ensure what crops and varieties need to be grown, to bring in technology to improve productivity. So that is the context in which this new bill was put in place, the Trade and Commerce Facilitation Bill, as well as the accompanying the Farming Agreement Bill, so that the farmers also get assured of prices ahead of planting, as also the Essential Commodity Act amendment, which will remove this sword hanging on the heads of any participant, that after we make investment, we don't know when the act will get invoked, and put a limit on how much stock can be bought and processed. So I think that shift to these new reforms will open up the longer term engagement prospects. Of course, a lot more work needs to be still done to make it happen. Through these new changes, what is done is that the gates have been opened for these kind of partnerships among all the value chain partners, right from people who are serving consumers at one end to logistics players and the processors and the retailers and the farmers at the other end. So I think that shift is going to now enable what we are looking forward to, because these needs for such a change have been identified over 20 years ago. That is when, of course, some of the earlier initiatives like ITC eChopal started in whichever states have reformed their APMC. But over these 20 years, with some back and forth among these reforms, so finally we have seen the new canvas on which the entire agriculture and agriculture supply chains can now be reimagined.
All right. I think one thing that comes to my mind is that the Farmer Produce Trade and Commerce Bill 2020, as you rightly said, would be one which would pave way for a lot of correction in the past mistakes and also development. there's been many people who have been saying that the small farmers would be the one who would not benefit from such a reform because they would not be, protected by the corporates. Corporates may not be interested in them. But before going into that, I was just looking at some report, and it says that, and it's quite evident, anyone who has an agricultural background, comes from the village and comes to live in city like us, you find that if you have an onion which is sold at 2.5 rupees, out here it can be 30, 40, 50, and there could be 50 to 3,000 price markup. As Institute of Social and Economic Change, R.S. Deshpande has done a good study on markets in Karnataka. Do you think that it is this particular arrangement, because who is protesting? And it is just not the Aratyas who are protesting, it's the farmer also who is protesting. Why are farmers protesting when things seems to be in favor of them? And secondly, why are farmers really sticking to this? Is there any, socio-economic or socio-political dynamics to it? And how do we understand this?
So the farmers who have been protesting are essentially looking at the concern that with now these changes, will the government end the minimum support price based procurement system also? Because farmers growing wheat and rice in particular, and certainly while the minimum support price exists for many other crops, but largely these two crops and to some degree subsequently oil seeds, these are bought by FCI, or in case of oil seeds, maybe it is NAFED, and that assures the farmer a price. And over a period of time, these have been taken to a level which is unsustainably high in terms of the way the water is getting also used up in growing these crops. So there have been various recommendations from time to time saying that, this is an unsustainable situation and government should not be ending up distorting the markets. So as a signal which was coming from another direction is now being used as a reason for creating this kind of a fear amongst the farmers that this new acts will also mean automatic elimination of the minimum support price based procurement by the government. So these are two independent things. Certainly government has assured quite explicitly that there is no withdrawal of minimum support price based procurement. And in fact, given all these kind of concerns that are expressed, they have advanced the announcement of the current Rabi season's prices by 1 month, and already announced the price increases that are going to be done as the Rabi 2021 harvest is going to come in. So therefore, to use that as a basis for this kind of agitation and all that won't make sense, because otherwise you can hypothetically say anything could happen and then stall whatever progress that is occurring. Yeah, it is sure necessary that minimum support price, in any case, government will have to continue buying, because there is also a Food Security Act. There are low-income consumers to whom the food needs to get distributed as per that act, and the government will need to procure wheat and rice and other crops for that purpose. So therefore, that system is going to continue. Government is also committed, as they have said more than once, and announced those kind of support prices over the last few seasons, that over a certain minimum, over a certain cost of the farmers, the minimum support price will give 50% profit. So I think there are various other elements which are giving this kind of an assurance, because of which one should not be unduly concerned about that. The second concern, which is also being pushed among the farmers, to say that this farming agreement basically would ultimately mean that the corporates who are coming in to partner with farmers will take over the land and subsequently convert the farmers into laborer and exploit. So in fact, the farmers agreement bill which has been brought in cognizes for this concern which was being expressed by the farmers and other interest groups from the earlier years as these discussions have been going on, and make it quite explicit as one of the terms that under no circumstances, even if it is found that farmer is at fault and is not supplied, the land cannot be taken away, so that that kind of fear is also addressed. So from my side, I won't see the reason for these kind of concerns. On the contrary, all of these have been designed to balance and certainly protect the interests of the farmers. In fact, on the farming agreement front, as the various consultations happened in the various industry fora, the common thing that I hear from various corporates is that it is skewed in favor of the farmer. And yet I think we need to let it be like that because of the concerns that have come up from time to time. And so I don't see that as really the reason. Either it is misguided by design or lack of understanding, but I think communication and awareness needs to be built up to ensure that this kind of concerns are properly addressed.
And also I've seen this say that when you travel to Eastern UP, I come from Eastern UP, and even we do agriculture, and large number of farmers are small farmers, and they don't participate directly into the MSP or into the mandi. There are so many village level operators who operate on behalf of them, and they don't even pay them for years. And I've seen that happens. So farmers and small farmers have never benefited from these arrangements. And also mandis are 35, 36 kilometers far out. There's no proper aggregation that happens. Maybe this also allows for aggregation at the appropriate level, and hence it may help farmers. Secondly, I think you made a very pertinent point, but I was looking at the MSP figures, and it says, when I was a student of agricultural economics in 93, I found that 93% of the total procurement happens in Punjab, Haryana, and some part in Western UP. And today also you see these markets are very strong there, making even the rich farmers dependent on a cropping pattern, which is highly, not in favor of them in the long run, even in terms of water intakes, and in terms of diversification, and hence also supporting, corporatization of agriculture. So I think it would help farmer to move away from dependent on these crops to newer crops, as you rightly said, because this would diversify and create new segment based on demand. In fact, you have spearheaded something which has been unique in this world, not only in this country, ITC e-Choupal. And ITC e-Choupal, I know when I read all these Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement of Price Assurance and Farm Services Bill 2020, and when I see this, I think I clearly remember, how e-Choupal evolved in this country in Madhya Pradesh, and later on it went on even to the Eastern UP and other places, providing a kind of a different contract farming model. And you rightly said that, till now, if you look at the APMC Act, it is more transactional. In this context, if you could tell the audience that how this law of the Farmer Empowerment and Production Agreement of Price Assurance, which will help contract farming, and how contract farming works at present, and how it will start working in future, and how, then I'll come back to ITC e-Choupal, otherwise it'll be too many questions.
Yeah. So as far as contract farming is concerned, certainly it will work under, you can say, two different contexts, where there is a very strong reciprocal dependency between the farmer and the buying agency or buying company, that it is a specialty product, that unless I buy from these farmers as it is specially produced, I won't be able to run my factory, or I won't be able to service my consumers. And similarly, from a farmer side, the dependency is that unless I sell to this buying company or agency, it is not like a free market that I can go and sell because I'm getting a better premium here. So under a reciprocal dependency where both sides are dependent on each other for that particular produce, it becomes a win-win situation. So specialty crops like I buy a potato to make French fries, or I buy certain organic crop for organic exports, and I buy certain IPM crops for a specialty situation for food safety. So for these kind of crops or seeds, for example, with its full traceability on particular level of vigor and generation purity. So that is one context. The second, where large commodity crops, where it becomes a zero-sum game, in the sense that if it is a low price, the buyer benefits. If it is a high price, the seller or the farmer benefit. And therefore, there is no win-win in normal situation for a commodity crop, because you do a contract and subsequently if the prices go up, farmer would prefer that he'll go and sell to someone else. And similarly, if the prices go down, the buyer prefers that I show some quality dispute and then renege on the contract. So in a situation like that, what helps is creating an institutional arrangement like a derivative market, relying on either the futures or especially the options market, where the farmer is able to fix a future price. And if the prices go up further, the farmer gets the upside on the price. But if the prices fall, there is no downside, much like an insurance scheme. So I think integrating such kind of derivatives into the contracts written between a farmer and a buyer will also convert the commodity crops into a win-win situation. So I think that kind of an understanding is required in terms of which crops, what kind of contracts need to be written to create a win-win, rather than creating a zero sum and then always second guessing which side might renege on the contract and create a dispute. So the other risk which is there typically in contracts is what happens to the production risk should something go wrong on weather or any of the agronomic practices. So in the normal situation where there is no contract, as per the Prime Minister Fasal Bima Yojana, the farmer is protected. So tomorrow, under a contract farming system, if this kind of a protection need to be offered as the new farming agreement envisages, and if that risk has to be undertaken by the buyer of produce, it is important that the benefit of such kind of a crop insurance is also extended to the buyer. So in turn, a large number of such contracts then can be written. So therefore, it is important to understand what context and what conditions the contract farming will help, and do it only under the situation and take advantage of derivatives. In fact, one other reform which has been done a few months ago is that since our derivative markets are still evolving and it will take time to develop the required depth and width over and above whatever significant progress that has already been done by the various exchanges. The government had also created a new mechanism in the form of options devolving on spot prices of physical goods, so that a contract can also literally write like what is called an over-the-counter option, not necessarily through an exchange, which have to go through a futures as an underlying. I think these are interesting changes which have been done, which will also benefit the futures contracts. And there is also the discussions that are happening on the deliverable contracts for longer term or forward contracts. I think some of these mechanisms will help as the farmer awareness is brought up. Initially, the relatively larger farmers will benefit, and over time, the benefit also reach out to smaller farmers as well through various kinds of cooperatives and FPOs and collectives that get formed, so that this kind of combining resources can happen through contract farming as a methodology.
In fact, well said, CEO, on what needs to be the way contracts needs to be, tallied up with all these extra risk aversion policies for the farmers. But when you look at contract farming and also the way some of the contract farming has been done in the world, what you said, you made a very interesting statement, transaction. What about relational and developmental oriented vertical integration? Will they be possible? Because I see that large number of farmers are small, as you rightly said, and Swaminathan's committee way back in 1980s has proposed a small farmer business consortium. Will those things start happening now as these two bills pave way for them? And even the Prime Minister Fasal Bima Yojana provides some amount of support to those things.
Yeah, so there are two types of small farmers, one with some marketable surplus and the other which are completely subsistence farmers. So one needs to look at how do we protect these small farmers and what kind of mechanisms need to be created, distinctly different for these two sets. For those with marketable surplus, small farmers, the new laws are again very relevant. The Fair and Commerce Facilitation Bill brings the formal markets to the villages. You talked about in Eastern UP and in fact, for all practical purposes, many other parts of the country, other than some more developed situations. It is informal system that operates, and the new bill create that kind of a long-term engagement and bring formal markets to the village rather than farmer has to go into those kind of mandis. And the farmer agreement, like I said, with all the conditions will also empower. But I think this, whether it is a small farmer agribusiness consortium and other agencies like NABARD, and now NCDC also got added as part of implementing agencies under the new FPO guidelines, that is opening up now direct participation also by value chain players. So that is one of the new elements. So together with the agri infrastructure funds for not only for agriculture but also for other allied sectors as well as micro food enterprises. So I think all of these kind of initiatives will help in aggregating the small farmers and collectively giving them a bargaining power, and the markets moving closer to the villages. And through all these infrastructure funds and micro food enterprises enables a larger value capture rather than selling off their produce as commodities. And for the other lot, which is the subsistence farmers, there is a twofold effort which needs to be done, where they are not bringing anything to the market to sell, and therefore much of these agricultural marketing related laws bypass them. So what needs to be done for these subsistence farmers, and which are very, very large in number, almost 40% of all farmers don't have any marketable surplus for all practical purposes. So the two things that need to be done for this lot, one is building resilience to climate change, because today unseasonal rains in summer or very warm winters, or whenever rains happen bunching up in very short period of time, all of these related to climate change are impacting the production, and the people who suffer most are these very, very small farmers. So therefore building resilience through initiatives like climate smart villages, and there are many other programs of that kind. So reaching them to these small farmers is one step, so that they are able to cope with this vulnerability. The other is raising the awareness of these small and marginal farmers on high nutrition crops, and support growing with appropriate seed and other inputs, combined with elements like animal husbandry and backyard poultry, and some of these on a very, very small scale basis, so that the nutrition within the family is raised significantly, and so therefore create an ecosystem. Again, it could be through various forms of collectives and self-help groups that some of the states have done a very good job of. So growing those high nutrition crops for the subsistence farmers will be the second step. So these are the kinds of things that one need to specifically design and execute to protect the small farmers.
And this bill provides that scope. That's very good. In fact, when we look at the history of ITC eChaupal and its evolution over the last 2 decades, it reminds me of everything which did not exist as a law. You were able to, along with your team in ITC, able to create space for creating a very strong vertical coordination between the company and the farmers, and providing a very, developed, a very different model of win-win situation for farmers as well as ITC. If you could take us through this journey of these 2 decades and how it has unfolded, and what has been the learning for you for others to emulate in their contract farming or their relationship with the farmers.
Yeah, you are absolutely right that when we started 20 years ago, the very idea of saying that we will discover prices at home for the farmer in a village was not a legally complying kind of a mechanism. Therefore, we had to work with various state governments to get the APMC reformed to be able to implement it. So the institutions that didn't exist was the very basis for that innovation. How we used information technology, the conventional middlemen as the new service providers, and the farmer leaders as the village sanchalaks. So some of that really rode on the institutional voids. So that's how the model was built. But over these 20 years, we evolved 4 versions. Right now, we are in what is called a version 4.0. The first one was the agricultural value chain re-engineering. So if there is inefficiency in the existing system, we try to reduce that inefficiency. If there is some new value that can be captured, we try to do that in a manner and then redistributed the gains across all the value chain participants. So what happened in the very first version, we now call it 1.x version, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, like that. There are 6 different models within that version 1. But just to illustrate the key ones, the very first one was done for soybean, where the cost of multiple handling between a farm to mandi and mandi to the factory was nearly 8%, whereas when the farmer discovers price in village and brings it to a factory directly, it was 2% as aggregate cost. The 6% which got saved was redistributed between ITC, the farmer, and the additional intermediary created in the form of a sanchalak, one of the farmer leaders in the village. And that's how it became a revenue model for all stakeholders. The 1.2 was done for wheat, where we understood through consumer insighting that the consumers are looking for different needs for atta in different parts of the country in terms of what should be the texture and color, water absorption capacity in the dough, and many such parameters. And how do you match and deliver that by preserving identity of different varieties of wheat which are grown at the other end? And we could do it by directly buying from the farmer through a same village price discovery mode, and preserve that identity and created the appropriate blends, and that supported the Ashirvad Atta supply chain. So like that, there are for many different commodities based on their own dynamics. So value chains got re-engineered, creating that kind of a win-win for different kinds of crops, for coffee, for aquaculture, subsequently for milk, and for vegetables, and more recently for fruits after we launched the Be Natural brand, and so on. As times evolved, within about 3 to 4 years, we saw an opportunity to look at this value chain, re-engineered whatever we put in place, the infrastructure as a platform, and very similarly managed and improved the efficiency and effectiveness of the reverse flow of goods and services. So that's what took agri inputs into the villages, the financial services into the villages, FMCG products into the villages, and so on. And that also set up the Chaupal Sagar rural service centers, which also include the organized retail in rural. So the 2.x series created a platform out of what we built as an infrastructure in the 1.x series. As we move to the third version, together with some partners who were taking their products and services into the villages, we saw ourselves as a larger ecosystem and started offering ecosystem as a service under the 3.0 version. So whether it is for the Uberization of farm equipment, or for delivery of healthcare services, or for the communication and brand building services for various players from across different sectors in rural India. So it became an ecosystem. So the agri value chain became a platform, became an ecosystem in by the 3.x series. And what we are now doing in 4.0 is because in the new environment, there is a lot more tech startups we have seen now in the space of agriculture. There are as many as 600 agri-tech startups providing one or the other services. And but the struggle that many of these people go through is because they are point solutions, and unless they are integrated, it doesn't become a full solution for the farmer. If you are a hyper-local weather forecaster, you need a support of an agronomy advisor. If you have an agronomy advisor on top of hyper-local weather forecast, you also require availability of inputs. If you also make availability of input, then you need a credit to be attached to it, and so on, as a complete, what is called a meta market in the mind of a farmer. That it is a market in the mind of a farmer, but individuals who are reaching out are thinking it from their own industry's perspective, that I am a weather forecast provider, I am an agronomic advisor, or I am a seed seller, I am a nutrient seller, and so on. So how creating that kind of a integrated solution and creating a delivery mechanism to be able to scale it is what the ITC eChoupal 4.0 does. And that meta market is the current stage we are in. Work with a number of new startups as well as a lot of large companies in the agri input space, as well as many other customers who would want to buy agri output, and in collaboration with many other universities and all. So that is the current stage that we are in. So much of what you've done in 1, 2, and 3 become a lot more digital with the advancement of the entire imaging technologies, the remote sensing that exists, and the much better bandwidth which has reached at much lower cost into the villages now. And that's how the e-marketplace has been created. And I think over the next 2 or 3 years, we see that now we'll be able to scale it pan-India, certainly covering all the existing eChoupal 1, 2, 3 version areas, but also taking it beyond those areas to service the fuller part of the country.
Sivakumar, that's a very good summary of the journey that you have taken through ITC eChoupal, and the ITC 4.0 with 31,000 plus villages under its aegis. There's one element that really bothers me, and I'm going to ask you. I've been asking you for years this question, that as you rightly said, everybody looks at these models from their own sphere of influence. Is it ITC also has looked at from its own sphere of influence? It really needs to scale up to become a kind of a role model for everybody, to provide a kind of a meta market for every other player who wants to be as a part of it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what 4.0 does. While of course it is a business model for us, but the platform that is now created, it is easy for anybody to plug and play. As we speak, some 27 startups are involved at various stages of incubation and acceleration, and some of them are at more developed business model stage to reach their services to the farmers. On their own, it becomes a lot more for them to deliver these services, or even if they deliver, capture value and scale. So that kind of an integration, and so also for many of the larger input companies to translate all their innovations into a platform where it is integrated with many other complementary solutions brought in by other partners. So therefore, it is a platform on which many other participants can plug and play. Of course, looking at our experiences from time to time, several case studies get published on this, and people come in to study, and they can improvise and adapt for their own context. And as we do from many other models also, learn and improvise on an ongoing basis. I mean, that's how we are in 4.0 in these 20 years and are scaling. So I think certainly it's a wider platform than ever before. But even from version 2.0 and 3.0 and at each of these levels, even before 4.0 started, there were as many as 160 partner companies which rode on the eChoupal network. So except that the plug and play becomes far more easier because of the newer technologies. And of course, in agriculture, it can't all be technology. There's a lot of physical play. For every digital, audio, visual on farm extension that you are showing, there needs to be a demonstration plot in the village with tagged farmers along, so that the learning becomes a lot more real in their own situation and physical conditions. So it is always what we now call a phygital model. The physical and digital combined is what the meta market of ITC eChoupal 4.0 is.
Now that takes to a very interesting question of a subsistence agriculture, looking at physical market where you are aggregating so many agri-techs and agri-startups in the ecosystem. Also, I think one element which I see as a part of a very good design of ITC eChoupal is that the way one has aggregated villages, not just farmers, the villages, and the kind of activities that have been started with these agri-techs, more traceability, and hence preparation for better exports and other markets will open up. What are your views on this, and how would these bills actually help? You've already answered this in a part, but how would this help to really focus on the competitive advantage of our agri value chain?
Yeah, I think as a result of these changes in the bills as one element, which removes a lot of uncertainty because the Essential Commodities Act and those limits are not applicable to value chain players going forward, as also the documentation and year-to-year licensing under the APMC, even in the states where it got reformed, now opening up to the Trade and Commerce Act, and farming agreement wherever it is applicable in those specialty crops until such time that derivative markets evolve. So that certainly opens up a lot of opportunity. But equally importantly, the new FPO guidelines, which enable the value chain players to participate directly together with farmers in building the capacity of FPOs and strengthening them as one means of aggregating to transact, along with the infrastructure funds that will give the support to the farmers to put up their own post-harvest infrastructure and preliminary value addition. I think as a combination of all of these, we now also need to work with the various state governments to create public, private, and producer partnerships, as we have already initiated in a few states, to work on identified what we are calling as crop value chain clusters to increase the total factor productivity, which is the point I was starting this conversation with. Now, we ourselves are working, are about to commence work in some of them in light of these new laws and other funds that got created across 24 value chains of various crops in terms of grains, oil seeds, and pulses, and fruits and vegetables, and trees, the plantations, and all of these, and even marine products like aquaculture and so on, across 21 different states, supporting as many as 3,000 FPOs. through supported by this eChaupal 4.0 system. I think in a manner that it enhances our own business opportunity, as also multiplying the farmers' incomes in these value chains, and supporting the ecology, that we are more environmentally sensitive in whatever is being done. The whole climate smart villages context, I brought out the subsistence farmer related aspect, but we have very large scale effort going on building the climate smart villages. So I think that is the kind of a roadmap that we have, which is all getting further energized yet again because of this new changes.
Siv, there has been a lot of concern, from one quarter, that is Aratyas and intermediaries, that they, a lot of people say that they'll be displaced. The critics have been saying, but you have a very interesting experience in terms of Sanchalaks to Samyojaks, and you also kind of, transition during the time when Aratyas were protesting against ITC eChaupal's initiatives. Can you tell us how things can change, and what kind of scope does this regulations bring about in terms of integrating even those who get replaced? They may not get replaced, but even those who get replaced into the model.
Yeah, no, there are two different situations. So firstly, APMCs are not going to go away anywhere, and therefore Aratyas are going to exist and continue to provide and do whatever activities they have been doing in the past. I think one of the interesting innovation in the new bill is that it is not changing APMC, but it is creating larger market spaces outside of APMC. So yes, it is certainly possible that the volume that is going through APMC might come down in the short run, but as the productivity improves, we will be producing a lot more, and therefore APMCs for the general purpose commodities will continue to be an important kind of a platform through which the commodities will get transacted. So one is certainly, I think, what happened after the eChaupal was launched in, for example, Madhya Pradesh when it was first done, that after a couple of years, the government also really got activated and started improving the conditions that were prevailing in the mandis. Because as eChaupal introduced electronic weigh bridges, the farmers saw that as a more transparent mechanism. So the mandis started introducing electronic weigh bridges. As the farmers were turnaround time was very high in eChaupals, and very quickly they were able to complete. Very similarly, the government expanded infrastructure to create that. As in Chaupal Sagars, farmers got time to utilities for their own well-being. Same thing started happening in Mandi. So I think one is APMCs will need to get more competitive and create better services for the farmers on one hand. The second is that in the value-added agriculture, as again demonstrated by the eChaupal system, all the strengths and capabilities of these Aratyas who are very good in sampling, quality assessment, understanding the risks in a situation where institutions are not evolving, how can they become service providers like the Samyojaks in the eChaupal system delivered to this new value chain that are getting created? A lot of post-harvest activity will have to happen. One of the questions that you had asked in the beginning was how much loss that is occurring in the along the supply chain. Now, at one estimate, it is as much as 1 lakh crores of rupees is lost as wastage along the chain. So there is a need to mitigate that kind of waste. So there is logistics management, the cold chain that needs to come in for certain crops. So there are many roles that the service provision will need to happen. And as people with certain kind of strengths, these Aratyas, the village traders, will be in a position to perform these in a much better fashion than anyone else. So I think that kind of reorientation of jobs for some people is also an opportunity. over and above whatever competitive APMCs roles that they'll be playing inside the mandis itself. So I think that is something which is needs to be again awareness needs to be built as to what all opportunities exist, where required appropriate training needs to be provided by all the stakeholders involved, where required appropriate fundings need to be created, like there are Mudra loans and startup funds and some of these kind of things. Probably some need to be earmarked for agriculture and agricultural supply chains for this kind of role transition that some of these people will need to take. But opportunities are plenty.
Siv, I think that's a very good point. Again, that small financial initiative may be, focus also towards agriculture to build the ecosystem of this new change. But agriculture, as we have seen, would require a very strong logistics and infrastructure network, warehousing, cold storage, and other logistics and transportation facilities. As you rightly said, end-to-end integration through IT, but they also require the physical infrastructure. I think we do not have much time, so I'm just integrating one or two questions along this. V.V. Venugopal asked that, why is it that logistics and transportation or 3PL companies are not really investing into the rural India?
Yeah, currently, obviously there are easily executable opportunities in urban, given the density of usage and density of need. Rural is far more dispersed. But I think once both onward and reverse flow are going to get integrated with more digitized networks operating, the informal logistics and transportation sector, which was operating in the villages, can also get formalized, and many of the 3PO operators can start looking at this opportunity, because the visibility of data as to where is the demand, where is the supply, what is happening to various lanes. So I think some of that needs to happen, and the earlier regulation kept the sector so informal that there was no viability in creating this kind of backbone in terms of digital infrastructure. I think once that comes in, the opportunities for the logistics operators also will expand.
There is one more question in the same sense, and you also made a reference to the production cluster. What is the status of production clusters and dedicated corridors, rail or road, for faster and seamless movement of produce across India? This might help reduce price disparity by geography. This is a question from Prakash Kumar. I've just added a few more things, but this is originally a question from him. See, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think overall logistics costs in India certainly are very high. I mean, if you look at logistics cost as a percentage of GDP, we are at about 14%, and more competitive economies are half of it, at between 6 to 8%. So because our share of truck transportation is very high relative to our rail transportation and waterways. So I think the newer corridors that are getting developed will have much better rail integration, and our ocean transportation to move from coastal state to another coastal state, from west to east or east to west, has also been limited. But I think one of the unintended positive consequence of this COVID over the last few months has been extraordinary innovation by the railways in terms of how they were doing it now, because there were no passenger trains on the tracks. But having experienced the uptick in the movement of the rail transportation for goods, right now they are creating many interesting options, including for agricultural goods, and that innovation will stand us in good stead, because in the initial few weeks, trucks were getting stuck along the borders in the COVID time. A lot of companies started using not only
waterways. You see in the eastern corridor, you see waterways, then you say north is full of waterways. What role will they play in agricultural growth? and growth of corporate farming and FPOs?
Yeah, domestic waterways, to my mind, will still be limited compared to many other countries. But I see the ocean waterway usage of larger ships, like I started saying, from west to east coast rather than a domestic rail or road, because that will still be less expensive wherever one needs to move something from, let's say, Gujarat to Bengal or vice versa. As we already started doing from, let's say, Gujarat to even Tamil Nadu and Gujarat to Orissa, some of these kind of transportation will start using the ocean routes more often. And domestic waterways, I think, still will be not in the immediate future, probably in the next phase once we develop them in the course of next few years.
You have already answered this question, but as it comes from a student from Center of Agriculture Management, Bhubaneswar, I thought I'll put it to you. Sir, there is a major challenge to feed the country growing population. So according to you, what agriculture sector could do to overcome the problem of starvation in future?
Yeah, I think, like I said, total factor productivity improvement is one. When I'm saying total factor, certainly it is starting with the farm as well as along the supply chain. Compared to many other countries in the world, we are half to 2/3 of the farm productivity levels. Along the supply chain, there is wastage of food. So I think from the production side, that is the effort that needs to happen. On the consumption side or the demand side, I think the major challenge is still in terms of the low levels of income for many consumers, and the larger economic growth and somewhat outside the agri sector opportunities that can be created for income expansion. In the meanwhile, obviously, as we have seen, the value of the buffer stock with the government in the last few months through the Prime Minister Garib Kalyan Yojana in terms of how food was made available to migrant workers and other poor during this distress period. So it is government supported distribution of food to the poor will need to supplement till such time we are able to take all segments of workforce to better incomes in the longer run. But I think largely more than food, I think the concern for the nation at this time is on nutrition security in terms of what is called a hidden hunger, getting the right consumption of nutrients, especially for pregnant mothers, young children. So I think that aspect is also something that we need to take care, and which is where the newer supply chains will connect the appropriate consumption as well as the point that I was making in the subsistence farming in terms of the backyard farming for the subsistence farmers in terms of better nutritive crops being grown there. Over these years, the cereals have taken over the various minor millets, which are much more nutritive, and therefore getting back to these high nutrition millets, expanding pulses. So there's crop diversification also will help in this context. So there's no silver bullet to managing with a situation like this, but a combination of these many initiatives is what can help both in the general food security through total factor productivity, as well as dealing with the hidden hunger and creating that nutrition security.
See, we are shooting time, but I think I got one more good question from Dubai. Indians in Dubai also interested in knowing how Indian agriculture is going to reform and regenerate itself. But the question is on the food processing sector requires more focused attention as it can play an important role in reducing post-harvest losses and aid the creation of an additional market for farm output. What are your views?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for many of the crops, especially for the perishables, food processing is extremely important from the point of view of preserving the crops across seasons, from improving the value of making them bioavailable to the consumers, as well as in delivering convenience for buying and consuming, as well as enhancing the food safety. There are many areas in which food processing can add value to the consumers and farmers. So I think these new laws, once again, to my mind, create a very good environment for food processing sector to prosper. because it was always a chicken and egg issue for the food processing sector and the farmers. Farmers suffered because there was no offtake from food processing sector, and therefore perishability and wastage was a challenge. And food processing sector was complaining that I don't get the processing variety of fruits or vegetables, I don't get the right quality of raw material, and therefore capacity which was put up also remain underutilized. I think what is connecting these two segments now is a longer term engagement. In the erstwhile system, the relationship was one of transactional, and now with the opening up of the trade and commerce as well as the farming agreement opportunity and removal of the Essential Commodities Act and the various other funds that I talked about, all of this creates an environment where food processors can engage with the farmers in a longer term relationship, and that is what can also support food processing sector and therefore deliver value to the consumer, and therefore in turn creating value for the farmer.
Thank you, Steve. I think you have given us a very great view of how the agriculture sector is going to unfold, how historically it has unfolded, and even the story of ITC Chopal has been a very important thing. And I also believe in the way you spoke, because it is very clear from even the literature in supply chain that a processor and a farmer needs to work as a win-win model and depend and have huge trust in each other. Exploitation of any one of them would be doomed for both of them, and hence all these arguments of exploitation may end, because largely a processor also needs a very guaranteed supply base, and that requires a huge amount of tools that will help you to build this trust. So thank you, Shiv, from my side and from ISCM for taking out your time and speaking on such a current and historically so relevant topic. I'll invite Jaisal to say the vote of thanks. Thank you,
Thank
Shiv.
you, Rakesh. I'm chatting with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you, Sivakumar. Thanks for being there. I think a wonderful takeaway for all the attendees today on the perspective of Indian agriculture market in the current scenario and what the future holds for the Indian farming community. Thank you so much, Sivakumar. Thanks for sparing time and sharing your insights. I would like to thank all the attendees for being there and listening to the session today. And last but not the least, a big thank you to the entire ISCM team, without whom it is not possible. Thanks, everyone, and Team ISCM. Thank you so much. Have a good day ahead. Thank you, everybody.